The man who once crawled through enemy fire now struggles with an airport kiosk. Arthur Jenkins, 82, stood beneath the cold fluorescent lights of Dayton International, a lone figure amid a tide of strangers. Around him, the world surged forward, impatient, wireless, and indifferent, but he remained still, his frame weathered but upright, like a monument half forgotten in a city that no longer reads the plaques. He was dressed plainly, pressed slacks, polished shoes, a VFW cap pulled low over his eyes. His one good hand gripped a duffel bag. The other sleeve hung empty, folded neatly against his side, a quiet declaration of something long lost and never mourned properly. This wasn't Normandy. This wasn't Ia Drang. This was America 2025. And here, his courage didn't earn salutes. It earned sighs. He had survived the jungle, the shrapnel, and the long, aching silence of coming home to a country that didn't want him. But what waited for him at 30,000 feet would test something deeper. Not his strength, not his skill, but his dignity. At 82 years old, Arthur "Art" Jenkins moved with the deliberate economy of a man who had learned long ago not to waste a single motion. His world had shrunk to the size of his small, tidy house in suburban Ohio, a sanctuary filled with the ghosts of a life well lived. The scent of sawdust hung faintly in the air from his workshop, where he turned wood into simple, beautiful things, a testament to the patience held in his one remaining hand. His other arm was a memory, left behind in the jungles of the Ia Drang Valley in 1965. It was a price he had paid, a debt settled with his youth. Today, however, his routine was broken by a rare and joyous occasion. His granddaughter, Sarah, was graduating from college in San Diego. Packing was a slow, methodical ritual. Each item, a pressed shirt, a photograph of his late wife, Eleanor, tucked into a worn leather-bound book, was placed with care into a simple canvas duffel bag. This trip was more than a journey across the country. It was a pilgrimage toward the future he had fought for. Sarah was his living legacy, the bright, shining proof that his sacrifice had meant something. The airport was another world entirely. It was a hurricane of noise, haste, and impersonal efficiency. People swirled around him, their faces buried in glowing screens, their bodies moving with a hurried self-importance that made him feel like a rock in a rushing stream, ancient, unmoving, and in the way. He navigated the check-in kiosks and the TSA security lines with a quiet stoicism, the same way he had navigated minefields and ambushes 60 years prior. You kept your head down, you did what was asked, and you moved forward. But here, his missing arm wasn't a mark of honor. It was an inconvenience, earning him impatient sighs as he fumbled with his belt and shoes. He felt a familiar dull ache, not in his phantom limb, but in his soul. It was the ache of being invisible. Boarding flight 1178 to San Diego, he felt a flicker of relief. The ordeal of the airport was almost over. He shuffled down the narrow aisle, clutching his duffel bag, his eyes scanning the seat numbers. He found his row and began the awkward one-handed maneuver of lifting his bag into the overhead compartment. It wasn't heavy, but the angle was difficult. He expected, at most, a moment of patient waiting from those behind him. It was a simple, unspoken courtesy. That was his expectation. The reality was a sharp, clipped voice that cut through the low hum of the cabin. "Sir, we don't have all day. Other people need to board." The voice belonged to a flight attendant. Her name tag read, Slowy. She stood with her arms crossed, her foot tapping a brisk, impatient rhythm on the carpeted floor. Her face was a mask of strained professionalism, but her eyes held a weariness that bordered on contempt. The words, though not shouted, were loud enough to be a public spectacle. Heads turned. A ripple of uncomfortable silence passed through the surrounding rows. For Art, the cabin suddenly felt scorching hot. The quiet dignity he had guarded so carefully for 82 years felt as if it were being stripped from him, layer by layer, under the fluorescent lights of the aircraft. This was not a physical attack, but an assault on his personhood. It was the deepest kind of humiliation, the kind that tells you are not a man, but a problem, an obstacle. This was the gap, the chasm between the simple respect a man expects and the casual cruelty a busy world delivers. His life, so carefully balanced, was suddenly, violently, thrown off kilter. Before he could even formulate a response, a young man from the row behind him was on his feet. He looked no older than his granddaughter. "Here, let me get that for you, sir," the young man said, his voice a quiet rebuke to the flight attendant's harshness. He took the bag from Art's hand and placed it effortlessly into the bin, closing the door with a soft click. He gave Chloe a brief, disapproving glance before turning back to Art. "You okay, sir?" he asked. Art, his face flushed with a mixture of shame and gratitude, could only manage a nod. He sank into his window seat, the worn fabric of his VFW cap feeling heavy on his head. He stared out the small, thick window at the tarmac, seeing nothing. His conscious desire was simple: to disappear, to become invisible again, but this time on his own terms. To endure the next 5 hours and let this moment pass into the ether of forgotten slights. He had survived far worse. This, he told himself, was nothing, a few hours of discomfort. But Arthur Jenkins was about to learn that sometimes the quietest battles, fought at 30,000 feet, can wound a soul in ways a battlefield never could. The initial ascent of Flight 1178 was a temporary reprieve. As the aircraft climbed through the clouds, leaving the Earth behind, Art felt a sense of detachment. He could almost convince himself that the incident during boarding was a small thing, a minor tear in the fabric of an otherwise good day. He was a master of compartmentalization, a skill learned in a place where dwelling on the horrors of the moment was a luxury no soldier could afford. You put it in a box, you locked the box, and you moved on. He focused on Sarah, her smile, the pride he would feel watching her walk across the stage. But the cabin of an airplane is a sealed world, a pressurized tube where small indignities have no place to dissipate. They linger, they fester. His tormentor, Chloe, moved up and down the aisle with a brisk, almost aggressive efficiency. He watched her interact with other passengers. To a businessman in first class, she was all smiles and deference. To a young mother struggling with a crying baby, she was perfunctory, offering a tight, artificial smile that didn't reach her eyes. Art saw a woman stretched to her limit, a person for whom empathy had become too costly an emotion to dispense freely. He tried to understand. Then came the drink service. The cart rattled its way down the aisle, a mobile island of feigned hospitality. When it reached his row, Chloe asked for his order in a flat, monotone voice. "Just a ginger ale, please," Art said quietly. She placed the plastic cup and a small can on his tray table without a word and moved on. Art looked at the can. The pull tab was a small, frustratingly modern invention. With two hands, it was a thoughtless action. With one, it was a puzzle. He tried to brace the can against the edge of the tray table, using his thumb to pry the tab open. He expected it to give way with a familiar hiss. Instead, the can slipped. It tumbled from his grasp, the fizzy amber liquid erupting across his tray, soaking his pants and splashing onto the floor. A cold, sticky mess. a small accident, but in his heightened state of self-consciousness, it felt like a catastrophic failure. Chloe heard the commotion and turned back, the cart groaning to a halt. The look on her face was not one of concern, but of pure exasperation. This was the gap, opening once more. Art expected perhaps a simple, "Oh, let me help you with that." What he received was a dagger of a glance. "Just wonderful," she muttered, her voice low but laced with sarcasm. She grabbed a handful of paper napkins, thrust them at him, and said, "Here." She didn't offer to clean the spill on the floor. She simply turned and continued her service, leaving him to deal with the sticky shame of his own clumsiness. Art dabbed uselessly at his soaked trousers, his face burning. He felt the eyes of the other passengers on him, some with pity, some with annoyance. He was once again the problem, the source of a delay, a mess to be cleaned up. The quiet courage he prided himself on was beginning to fray at the edges. A little while later, the passenger in the aisle seat, a friendly man in his 60s, noticed Art's VFW cap. "Vietnam?" he asked, his voice gentle. Art nodded. 65th Infantry, Ia Drang." "Wow," the man said, a genuine respect in his voice. "I was stateside, Fort Dix. Never saw any action myself. Thank you for your service." The words, so often said, sometimes felt hollow. But coming from this man, at this moment, they were a lifeline. Art gave a small, grateful smile. "We all did our part," he said. It was a brief exchange, but it was a moment of being seen. It reminded him of who he was, beyond the clumsy old man who spilled his soda. It was a small deposit into the dwindling account of his dignity. But the balance of the flight seemed determined to bankrupt him. His antagonist was not just Chloe, but the entire environment she represented. A world that moved too fast, that had no time for the slow, the old, the scarred. He saw her tap impatiently at her smartwatch and caught a glimpse of a frantic text on the screen. "Delay complaint. Gate A23, explain." He saw then that she wasn't just cruel. She was a cog in a machine that demanded inhuman speed, a soldier in a different kind of war, one fought with customer satisfaction scores and on-time performance metrics. This insight didn't excuse her behavior, but it shaded it with a tragic complexity. She was a prisoner too. Yet this understanding brought him little comfort. He was still the one bearing the brunt of her silent war. His body, old and tired from the early start, ached. He knew he needed to get up, to stretch, to use the lavatory. But the thought of another interaction, another opportunity for public humiliation, filled him with a cold dread. He was a man who had faced down machine gun fire, but he was intimidated by a walk down the aisle of an airplane. The irony was bitter. He sat, a prisoner in his own seat, watching the clouds drift by, feeling every one of the 2,000 miles separating him from the warmth of his granddaughter's hug. A small moment of connection in a sea of indifference. But the tide was still turning against him, and the flight attendant's patience was wearing thinner with every passing mile. There is a point in every siege where the walls begin to crack. For Arthur Jenkins, that moment arrived 2 hours out from San Diego. The dull ache in his joints had become a pressing need. He could no longer put off the walk to the lavatory. He steeled himself, taking a slow, deep breath. It was a simple act, one performed by hundreds of people on thousands of flights every day. For him, it felt like a strategic operation, fraught with risk. He eased himself out of his seat, his movements careful and measured. The young man, Leo, gave him a small, encouraging nod. Art started down the aisle, his eyes fixed on the illuminated sign at the back of the plane. And there, like a blockade, was the service cart. Chloe was collecting trash, her back to him, He waited for a moment, hoping she would sense his presence. She didn't. He cleared his throat. Nothing. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, miss." He expected her to turn, perhaps with a sigh, and move the cart a few inches to let him pass. It was a reasonable expectation. The gap that opened this time was a chasm of cold dismissal. She turned her head slightly, not her body, and looked at him over her shoulder. "You'll have to wait," she said, her voice flat and final. "I'm in the middle of service." She then turned away, dismissing him completely, leaving him standing there in the middle of the aisle. Several passengers looked up, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. He was on display again, his simple human need denied and broadcast as a public nuisance. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on his shoulders. He felt his face flush, a hot wave of anger and shame washing over him. For a split second, the quiet man was gone, and a soldier stood in his place, a soldier trained to meet aggression with overwhelming force. But what could he do? Yell? Make a scene? Confirm in everyone's eyes that he was just a troublesome old man? He did what he had always done. He retreated. He turned around, made the slow, defeated walk back to his seat, and collapsed into it. He had been repelled by an enemy he couldn't fight, in a battle he hadn't chosen. He felt smaller, older, and more broken than ever before. And in that moment of profound shame, his mind did what minds do to protect themselves. It fled. It fled the pressurized cabin of Flight 1178, fled the year 2025, and traveled back 60 years to another airport, in another lifetime. Sometimes, a present hurt doesn't just sting, it rips open the scar tissue of an old wound. For Art, the sting of Chloe's dismissal was a phantom pain, echoing a deeper, more profound injury from his past. He wasn't in the plane anymore. He was 21 years old, standing in the middle of San Francisco International Airport in 1970. He was rail-thin, his uniform hanging loosely on his frame, his left arm in a sling, the stump beneath it still raw and angry. He was home, but he didn't feel home. The world he had returned to was not the one he had left. It was a world of angry chants, of sideways glances, of a tension so thick it felt like the humid jungle air he had just escaped. A young woman with long hair and a tie-dyed shirt approached him. He thought she was coming to welcome him home. He started to smile. That was his expectation. The reality was the spray of spittle on his cheek. "Baby killer!" she shrieked, her face contorted with a rage he couldn't comprehend. "How many kids did you murder today, you monster?" He just stood there, frozen. The sounds of the airport faded into a dull roar. He didn't see a protester. He saw the face of his friend, Miller, dying in his arms. He saw the terrified eyes of a village child. He saw the chaos and the fear and the blood. And he saw this woman, who knew nothing of it, hating him for it. He could have screamed at her. He could have told her about Miller, about the oath he took, about the nights spent in terror. He could have tried to make her understand, but he didn't. He took a handkerchief from his pocket, wiped his face, and walked away. He absorbed the blow, internalized the shame, and carried it with him. He carried it for 60 years, a piece of shrapnel lodged in his soul, a quiet companion to the arm he'd left behind. It was a lesson in a different kind of survival, how to live in a world that doesn't understand your sacrifice, and worse, doesn't care to. The memory didn't comfort him, it clarified. The woman on the plane, Chloe, was not the protester, but the feeling was the same. It was the feeling of being unseen, of having your history, your sacrifice, your very humanity, erased by the casual indifference of another. Have you ever felt invisible? Ever had a moment where you felt your past, your experiences, your contributions just didn't matter to the world around you? Let us know in the comments below. Your stories are a powerful reminder that we are not alone in these feelings. Art looked out the window again, the reflection showing a tired old man. He had weathered the scorn of a nation then, just as he was weathering the scorn of this flight attendant now. But every man has a breaking point. The question was no longer if it would come, but when. And in what form? The tone of the flight shifted as the plane began its long, slow descent toward San Diego. The cabin chimed, and the captain's voice announced their initial approach. For most passengers, it was a moment of relief, of anticipation. For Art, it was the beginning of the end of his ordeal. He had walled himself off, retreating into a quiet, internal fortress where no further slights could reach him. He had endured. But the young man beside him, Leo, had not. Leo had been simmering, a vessel of youthful, righteous indignation. He had watched every interaction, every dismissal, every quiet moment of Art's humiliation. For Leo, this wasn't just poor customer service. It was a profound moral offense. In his world, a world of instant communication and digital accountability, injustice was not something to be endured. It was something to be exposed. As the "Fasten Seatbelt" sign illuminated, Leo turned to Art, his face set with determination. He held up his smartphone. "Sir," he said, his voice low but intense. "This is not right. What she did to you is not okay. I've been watching her the whole flight." He tapped his screen. "I'm going to record her. When we get off, I'll ask her why she felt it was appropriate to treat a veteran with such disrespect. I'll get her name, her employee number. I'll post it. It'll go viral. The airline will have to fire her. It's the only way people like that learn." And there it was. The crisis. The final, most difficult choice laid at Arthur Jenkins's feet. Leo was offering him a weapon, a modern weapon, more powerful than any rifle Art had ever carried. It was the weapon of public shame, of immediate and devastating retribution. It was justice, 21st century style. The path of the counter-idea, dignity can only be reclaimed through confrontation, was laid bare before him. It was a tempting path. A part of him, the part that still stung from the spittle of the protester, the part that recoiled from Chloe's disdain, wanted to say yes. It wanted to see her face when confronted. It wanted her to feel a fraction of the humiliation he had felt. It wanted the world to see and to judge. He had the power in that moment to bring this woman's career, her livelihood, crashing down around her. He could become the agent of her ruin. He looked at Leo's face, flushed with the certainty of youth, and he saw a good heart. He saw a young man standing up for an old man, and it moved him deeply. Then he looked down the aisle and saw Chloe, her shoulders slumped as she went through the final safety checks. He saw the exhaustion in the lines around her eyes, the strain in her jaw. He didn't see a monster. He saw the woman from the check-in counter. He saw the stressed-out employee getting angry texts on her watch. He saw a person caught in the gears of a merciless machine, a person who had let the pressure turn her bitter. He saw someone who was, in her own way, also having a very bad day. And he thought about his granddaughter, Sarah. In a few hours, he would be hugging her. When she looked at him, what kind of man did he want her to see? A man who had found victory in the destruction of another, or something else? What was the true nature of the strength he had learned in the war, and in the long, quiet decades after? Was it the strength to fight back, or the strength not to? The choice crystallized. It was absolute. It was irreversible. It was the culmination of 82 years of life. He reached out his one good hand and gently, firmly placed it over Leo's phone, covering the camera lens. "No, son," he said, his voice clear and steady. "Don't do that." Leo stared at him, his mouth agape. Confusion warred with his indignation. "But, sir, she can't get away with this. It's not right." "I know," Art said, his eyes holding Leo's. "It's not, but she's just having a bad day. We all have them." He took his hand off the phone. "That's not our way. That's not how we fix things." The "we" hung in the air between them. It was the "we" of men who understood that true honor wasn't about winning every battle, but about choosing which battles were worth fighting. Leo slowly lowered his phone, the fire in his eyes dimming, replaced by a look of profound, dawning respect. He was a student, and he had just received a lesson he would never find in a classroom. In an age of digital pitchforks and public shaming, the old soldier had chosen a different weapon: grace. As the wheels of Flight 1178 touched the tarmac in San Diego, the battle for Arthur Jenkins's dignity was over. He had won it not by fighting, but by refusing to. Now, only the terms of the peace remained to be seen. The landing was smooth. The familiar bump and roar of the engines in reverse signaled the end of the journey. As the plane taxied to the gate, the cabin stirred with the restless energy of arrival. Phones were turned on, bags were pulled from overhead bins, and the collective focus of the passengers shifted to the next phase of their day. The small, intense drama that had unfolded at 30,000 feet had already been forgotten by most, but not by all. As the aisle filled, Art remained seated, waiting for the crowd to thin. He preferred to be last. It was easier that way. Leo waited with him, a quiet solidarity having formed between them. Finally, they stood and made their way to the front of the aircraft. Chloe was at her station by the door, the professional smile plastered back on her face. She was dispensing rote goodbyes and "Thank you for flying with us." Her eyes focused somewhere over the passengers' shoulders, already mentally on to the next task, the next flight. When Art reached the doorway, she braced herself. This was the moment she likely expected a complaint, a demand for her name, a final angry word. Her smile tightened. She avoided his gaze. This was the final gap. The gap between her expectation of conflict and the reality Art was about to create. He stopped directly in front of her, forcing her to meet his eyes. Her own flickered with apprehension. He didn't say a word about the flight, the spilled drink, the dismissals. He simply looked at her, not with anger, but with a clear, calm empathy. "Have a better day, ma'am," he said. The words were simple, but they landed with the force of a revelation. The professional mask on Chloe's face cracked. For a single unguarded second, her composure dissolved, and a wave of genuine emotion, surprise, shame, and perhaps even gratitude washed over her features. Her eyes glistened. She swallowed hard. "You too, sir," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." It wasn't an apology, not in words, but it was something more profound. It was an acknowledgement, a moment of shared humanity. Art gave a slight nod and stepped out of the plane and into the jet bridge, the weight on his shoulders feeling significantly lighter. They stepped into the bright light of the terminal, Arthur, Leo, and Sarah. He felt the weight of the flight lifting, one step at a time. Not because the world had changed, but because he had chosen not to let it change him. Then, Leo broke the silence. "Sir," he said, Eyes steady, voice soft. What you did back there. It mattered. Arthur didn't answer. He just nodded once and handed Leo the duffel bag. As they walked into the crowd, the old soldier moved lighter than he had in years. No fanfare, no applause. Just a man, his granddaughter, and the future beside him. Grace had no sound, but it carried. Some stories leave a mark not through volume, but through silence, strength, and restraint. If this one moved you, pass it on. Someone you know might need to hear it.